Alright, what's the story? I once bought Pimp My Ride for the Xbox 360 and my life has been on a downward spiral ever since. Seanson here. You know, there's been a few rare occasions where Ireland is actually used as a setting in certain video games. Some of the more notable examples of this is the level in Tomb Raider Chronicles where you play as a young Lara Croft exploring a haunted island just off the coast of Ireland. Now you can tell it's Ireland because, as always, a priest is here for some reason. There's also Clive Barker's Undying, a horror FPS released on the PC that takes place in a haunted estate that also just happens to be on the coast of Ireland. And my favourite take on Ireland in video games is the PS3 game Folklore, an action RPG that takes inspiration from Celtic fairy tales and mythology that also allows you to explore the village of Dublin in County Clare, which also happens to be on the coast of Ireland and may or may not be haunted. So now we know Ireland is featured in a few different video games and may or may not have a ghost problem. But were any of these games actually made in Ireland? No. Tomb Raider was made in England, Clive Barker's The Undying was made in America, and Folklore was made over in Japan. Even Ireland's beloved, iconic, untouchable, Gaelic games, football and hurling weren't even made in Ireland. They were made over in Australia by the lads who make the Aussie Rules games. Although, to be fair, there's a good chance that a few Irish lads emigrated over and joined the dev team for it, so I mean, it's close enough probably. So this got me thinking, what games were actually made in Ireland? There were a small number of games developed and released in the early 80s and early 90s, but they were mostly for the home computers available at the time. Your Commodores, your Amigas, your Spectrums, that kind of thing. I bet you didn't know the home computer port of Michael Jackson's Moonwalker was developed in Waterford now, did you? That's your useless knowledge of the day, by the way. Since then, Ireland has become a bit of a tech hub for Europe. Dell, Intel, Google, Twitter, Facebook, they all have their European headquarters here in Ireland. And if you're wondering why, well, it's definitely nothing to do with Ireland's spicy corporation tax. Definitely nothing to do with that at all. Now, it didn't take long for the games industry to catch on to the buzz as well. EA, Activision Blizzard, Riot Games, they all have big offices here in Dublin as well. But that being said, none of these offices are really involved directly in the development of games, more on the tech and support side of things. The bulk of the games that are developed and released here in Ireland mostly come from smaller studios that are dotted around the country. Games development has really picked up in Ireland over the past few years. There's a lot more support available to creators and developers, and because of that we've seen a lot of great content released over on the PC and on mobile platforms. But as for games made for console in Ireland, there's been pretty much nothing past or present. I did some research to try find out exactly how many Irish made games ever released on console, and I believe the number as of August 2020 is just 5 games. One of these is a 3DS eShop title called Lightspeed, which was developed by Wee Man Studios in Belfast. This kind of looks like a fun cross between F-Zero and Star Fox. This is still available for purchase on the 3DS eShop, so if you want to support an Irish indie team, I'd say check this out. It's pretty cheap and looks like a good time. As for the other 4 games, well, it turns out once upon a time there was actually a studio here in Dublin making games for console. Funcom was an independent developer founded in Norway in 1993. Now, they initially started out making games for the popular 16-bit consoles at the time, a few movie tie-ins like A Dinosaur's Tale and Pocahontas, and also some original titles like Days Before Christmas, one of the very few Christmas-themed games, and also this platformer called Nightmare Circus, which was only ever released physically in Brazil for some reason, but did later make its way to North America through the Sega Channel. They also made Dragonheart for the PS1. I'm not sure if you're aware that Dragonheart had a video game adaptation, but the less said about this game the better, to be honest. So in 1994, Funcom decided that it was time to expand, and they decided to set up a studio here in Dublin, aptly named Funcom Dublin. The studio was to specialise in making console games, while the team over in Oslo were going to focus more on PC development going forward. From an interview on GameDevelopers.ie, an old employee from Funcom Dublin stated, "We decided to set up an office in Dublin because of several factors, one of the most important being the art resources in the city. We saw the need to have a department within Funcom which could specialise in console games. While looking for interesting places, we naturally explored every detail from recruitment to rent, wages, taxes, and more. We chose Ireland in the end. There were mostly advantages taxes, as we saw, compared to many other places. So they set themselves up in an industrial estate in Sandyford, South Dublin, recruited recent graduates from the nearby colleges, and there you go, the first Irish console game studio was in action. So what are the 4 games that Funcom Dublin developed? Well, all of these games came out during the 7th generation of consoles. Now, 3 of these games were exclusive to the PlayStation, and one of the games came out on both the PlayStation and Sega Saturn. Also, all 4 of these games are racing games. Now, I know initially that may not sound very exciting, but each of these games are in fact very, very different from one another. Well, 2 of them are pretty much the same game, but we've 3 very, very different types of racing game here. 3. I don't know how to say the number 3. So today we're going to take a look at all 4 of the games released by Funcom Dublin, starting with their first game released on both the PlayStation and Sega Saturn in 1996, Impact Racing. Now the car on the front has guns on it, so that's a good start.
Impact Racing was the first game developed by Funcom Dublin. Released for the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn in 1996, Impact Racing is an arcade racing game that's pretty typical of the era. Many of the marquee titles released during the early days of both the PlayStation and Saturn were racing games. Over on the Saturn we had the much loved Daytona USA and Sega Rally, while Sony were showing off their system with arcade ports from Namco like Ridge Racer. During the first years of the console's lifespans, we started to see a few other racing series make a name for themselves on both consoles. Destruction Derby and Wipeout come to mind especially. And these 2 games in particular didn't just focus on pure racing, but also had gameplay that was intertwined with combat as well. So with Impact Racing here, it kind of feels like we've got a game that looks to combine the simplicity of arcade racers with gameplay that places a heavier focus on car combat as well. Now just a heads up, all footage here will be from the PS1 version of the game and is captured using an emulator. So if you see any weird visual errors, just keep that in mind, but I will show you some Saturn footage as well, just so you can compare the 2 versions for yourself. Now when you start Impact Racing, you'll notice that the game doesn't have a ton of options. You've got both a password and load feature, which was quite common at the time when memory cards were a pretty new concept for most consumers. But other than some difficulty toggles in the options, all you can really do here is just start the game. Now the game loads you into a car select screen and you've got a decent selection of cars available. The main thing that separates each car is its speed, firepower and armor. So how fast it can go, how much damage it can do, and how much damage it can take. This game generally requires you to do a good job at all 3 of these things, going fast, killing enemies, and not dying. So I try to play it safe by choosing a car that's decent at all 3, but there's some nice variety to suit different playstyles. Once you select your car, you're loaded immediately into the first track. No sign of any track select here. The goal in Impact Racing is to complete 4 laps of a track before the time limit expires. Every time you complete a lap, you gain extra time. So far it sounds like any standard arcade racer, but the main goal of Impact Racing actually has very little to do with racing at all. There are other cars on the road with you, but you aren't actually trying to beat them in a race. These cars are pretty much here to try slow you down or to try blow you up. Don't really think of them as opponents, think of them more as obstacles or targets. Thankfully, your car is kitted out with an assortment of weapons to take out these other lads on the road, and the goal in this game is not just to beat the 4 laps as fast as you can, but to blow up as many cars as you can along the way. You start the game off with 2 weak weapons, just a basic auto-fire laser and mines to attack enemies from the rear. At the beginning of each level, you are given a target number of cars to destroy. Cars spawn infinitely during the races, so you'll have plenty of opportunity to try rack up kills during each level. Now whenever you destroy a car, an item will spawn just ahead on the track. These items can be anything from extra ammo for your secondary weapons, health and armor pickups, and even items that add on extra time for you to complete the race. So if you're looking to get a high score in this game, and you are, it is an arcade racer after all, blowing up cars should be your main focus in every race. Now if you manage to finish a race and reach the target number of kills, you'll get taken to a bonus level. These levels are pretty important as beating them unlocks a new weapon for your vehicle. These stages themselves are generally just long stretches of tunnels with cars to destroy. If you destroy enough cars in these bonus levels, you will unlock a new weapon. Now these weapons can range from upgrades to your laser, missiles, fire traps, and even screen clearing bombs. And since as the game goes on, the number of enemies and the amount you have to kill increases, you're going to want to make sure your car is kitted out properly to handle the extra challenge. And that's pretty much the flow of the game from here. Move from track to track, race 4 laps, try to kill as many cars as you can, be quick enough to beat the race in the allotted time, and also don't die in the process. When it all comes together, it's actually pretty fun. Although, that being said, if you bought Impact Racing looking for a good racing game, that's not really what you're going to get here. The actual racing in this game is very, very basic. The only buttons used for driving in this game are the directional pad for steering and the X button to accelerate, and that's it. You don't even have the ability to brake. This isn't really a problem though, thanks to the very simple track design. The tracks are full of long straights with minimal turns, and what turns there are can be completed easily without letting go of the X button. This game is really just about going as fast as possible, and the tracks themselves really add very little challenge in that regard. The steering in this can also feel a little stiff at times, but the game is very forgiving when it comes to turning. It can almost feel like the game has a small bit of auto steer to assist you with it. So if you're looking for a game to challenge your driving skills, this really isn't the game for you. But on the other hand though, as an arcadey combat game, this is actually a lot of fun. Trying to blow up as many cars as possible while dodging mines and fire traps stayed fun and engaging throughout my time playing. And because the tracks themselves are so simple, it makes it really easy to focus on blowing up cars above all else. Even attacking enemies behind you is pretty easy thanks to the handy map that looks like it was taken straight out of an arcade game from the 80s. You can also sometimes blow up bonus cars which give you access to power-ups like infinite lasers or auto rockets, which are really fun. There's also a great sense of speed in this game. There are times when you're driving near top speed that this can feel like some sort of long lost link between Twisted Metal and Burnout. The sound also adds to this nicely as well. The sound effects for the vehicles and weapons are on point, and the game features a high tempo techno soundtrack that matches the intensity of the gameplay and complements it well. Also, it's very noticeable that they just got some Irish lad to do all the voices in this game, and it's kind of gas hearing an Irish accent in an arcade racer, to be honest.
You got it! 3 cars left, mine! 2 cars left, mine!
Unfortunately though, as with a lot of arcade racers released in the early years of the PS1 and Saturn, there's not really a whole lot of content in this game. There are only 3 unique tracks in Impact Racing: a city track, a snowy countryside track, and a track in space. Which I appreciate, because if you're gonna only have 3 tracks in your game, you might as well go with somewhere weird for the last one. Now, the game does have a total of 12 levels, so what we get here is an additional 3 variants of each track. We get a nighttime variant, we get a mirrored variant, and also a nighttime mirrored variant as well. I'm never really a fan of mirrored or coloured variants as a replacement for more unique tracks, but any extra content here is good. There's also 6 bonus levels as well, and while some of the visual updates for these tracks can look pretty cool and even trippy at times, these are all essentially the same track with a different skin each time, just a big long tunnel. Now, if you do manage to beat all 12 tracks in one sitting without dying or failing a race, you get to play 1 extra final track. Unfortunately though, this is just another reskin of the bonus stage really, although I guess the castle design does look pretty nice here, I guess. Beating the game does unlock some fun things. You gain access to a bonus car which has max speed, firepower and armor, which is cool. Also, the game lets you play around with an audio visualizer that has the whole game's soundtrack built in. I spent ages here after the game was done just messing around with this. Between the look of the visualizer and the music that was in the soundtrack, it was just a very 90s experience, and I appreciated it a lot. Also, remember cheat codes. When you beat the game also tells you a bunch of cheats that you can use for extended playthroughs like invincibility, infinite ammo, all weapons unlocked from the beginning, that kind of thing. Now, I would have spent ages messing about with this as a kid, so it's great to see them here as an extra bonus for beating the game. The kind of thing you would have jotted down and kept on a piece of paper inside the box forever. Look, all things considered, this is a pretty good game. It doesn't even look that bad for a console racer from 1996. There's some fun visual variety here, the cars and tracks can look a little primitive, but it runs well, there's a great sense of speed, and it's just fun blowing shit up. If you're looking for a traditional arcade racer, this may not be for you, but if you are looking to drive fast, listen to techno, and shoot some cars, then Funcom Dublin's first effort on the PlayStation and Saturn is well worth checking out.
So from here on out, the remaining games are all exclusive to the PlayStation. And next up, we're going to take a complete 180 and move away from arcadey combat racing to the world of dirt bikes?
So Championship Motocross featuring Ricky Carmichael, as the name would imply, is a motocross game featuring Ricky Carmichael. Now, I don't know much about motocross, to be honest. I think I played maybe 2 motocross games in my life, those being Excite Bike, the most realistic motocross game of them all, and another game called Freakstyle, which was basically SSX on dirt bikes, which is actually as cool as it sounds, so check that game out if that sounds interesting to you. So keep in mind, I'll be looking at this game today from the perspective of somebody who knows fuck all about motocross and motocross video games, so I may not be the best judge of this game's quality, but I will do my best as a fan of racing games in general to give it a fair shake. When we start up the game, we get to the main menu and we can see there's a bunch of standard options available. We have championship, single race, time trial, versus, practice, a good selection of modes, but nothing out of the ordinary here. This game is strictly focused on racing, so there aren't any freestyle or trick based modes here. The bulk of the single player content is in the championship mode. Each championship is categorized by a CC requirement, so naturally at the beginning of the game we work our way up from slower speeds up to the higher ranks, which we unlock by beating each championship. Now each championship has a group of races, with the lowest number of races being 6 and the highest number of races being 12. When it comes to choosing your bikes, you don't really have a whole lot of choice here. You can opt for a bike that has good speed and poor turning, a bike with poor speed and good turning, or a bike that's kinda decent at both. Now these bikes are seemingly licensed, but they're so basic in design that it's easier just to break them down into the green bike, the red bike, and the yellow bike. Now in terms of customization, there is some decent options available for the time. This is more of an arcade style racing game rather than a full-on simulation, but you do get to adjust your tyres, suspension, and other parts of the bike before each race to help set you up for changes in the terrain and weather, which is nice. And once you're into the actual game, well, be prepared to lose a fair bit early on. Now like I said, this isn't a simulation game, but I do get the feeling that the developers at Funcom wanted to put in some effort to try make it feel like the terrain and weather has a huge effect on how your bike handles. And if you come in just thinking you can easily turn around every corner without proper positioning, choosing the best possible lines and managing your braking well, you're gonna have a bad time. So my first few races were pretty abysmal, although I didn't want to let the game beat me, so I chose the bike with the best handling, and shortly after I think I got a good feel for the controls. The best way to play I found was to let go of the accelerator as you begin to turn a corner. Once your bike has pivoted enough to be facing the next straight, just hit the accelerator again and you'll be flying in no time. Once I got this down after a couple of races, I was actually having a really good time with this game. Graphically, I think it's pretty good for the time. There's some good mud effects and the tracks and racers all look pretty good in motion. There's also a good section of tracks here with tons of different locations too. There's also usually up to 3 alternative versions of each track, which can add new weather effects or changes to the track's layout. And trust me, there is a big difference between racing on wet sand and racing on dry sand, so these changes do actually change up how you'll be driving for each race. Also, the mad lads only went and put the Dublin mountains in as a track, and I mean, look at it, it's perfect. It's lashing rain, we've got a round tower. They nailed it, honestly. You know, seeing my home country in a video game will never not be a novelty to me, and I bet most don't even know there's a game out there with a deadly Dublin Mountains racetrack, so this was pretty fun to discover. The championship mode in this game can be pretty tough. Now the good news is that you usually got a lot of races in each championship, sometimes, as mentioned, up to 12 races in a row. Now this is good because it means if you do poorly on a couple of tracks, you're still in with a good chance of winning, but this is also bad because if you lose at the very end, well, you're playing 12 tracks in a row again. Now thankfully, once I got the controls down, I was winning enough races to pull through every time, although even when you're good, the AI in this game can be very, very tough. There were some races where I felt like it was almost impossible to win. The AI was so far ahead, even just at the beginning of the race, but this didn't happen too often, and most races were pretty fair and challenging. Although once I made it to 500cc and couldn't take a turn without falling off my bike, I felt like I had probably reached my limit for this game. Now my absolute favourite thing in this game though is its soundtrack. Now the game came out in late 1999, which means all of the music in this game is late 90s hard rock and nu metal, which, depending on how you feel about that era of music, you're either gonna fucking love or fucking hate the music here. This was the era when I first started listening to music as a kid, so I can appreciate how badly this music has aged, but a part of me will always unironically love a bit of nu metal every now and then. Now unfortunately, due to copyright, I can't play any of the songs for you, but just know that the game features music from Godsmack and a band called Guttermouth, so I'm sure you already know what this sounds like. Also, did you know that Vanilla Ice had a nu metal album at one point? Well, he does, and a song from that is played during the Dublin Mountains track, which is amazing, honestly. So that was Championship Motocross featuring Ricky Carmichael, and for somebody like myself who knows very little about motocross and motocross video games, I actually had a pretty good time with this regardless. The racing is fun and challenging, there's a lot of track variety, and the soundtrack is either amazing or terrible depending on your tolerance for late 90s rock music. But all around I found this to be a good time, although you'll probably dig it more if you're a fan of motocross yourself.
Not gonna lie, I enjoyed that game a lot more than I thought I was gonna. So the good news is that the next game is a direct follow-up to the last game, this time called Championship Motocross, featuring Ricky Carmichael, 2001. And would you believe it was released in the year 2001? A good year where nothing bad happened. Now this is actually the last game released by Funcom Dublin, but I guess it makes more sense to look at this game directly after its predecessor, just so we can see how the two stack up. And This one's a little weird.
So since both this game and its predecessor are pretty similar, I'm mostly going to talk about the new features in this game and how the two compare overall. So the first big thing I noticed was the updated UI and the extra modes added on. The UI here certainly looks a lot nicer, and there now seems to be a 2-player championship mode and a career mode added on as well. Now I thought I'd check out the career mode since it seems like the biggest addition. You start by picking a bike, but it doesn't really give you any information on the bikes that you're choosing, which is kind of weird, just the name, so I just ended up picking one randomly. And then we're into a 4-race tournament to start out. So the gameplay here is pretty similar for the most part. I would say that the feel of racing the bikes and the overall control here is a bit better. Now you've also got access to a power slide button, which allows you to take corners much easier in this game as well. The graphics here also look a bit nicer, and everything is pretty clean overall. It's the kind of upgrade you'd expect for a PS1 game released in 2001. Now while the graphics are definitely better, I think the game kinda looks a bit more bland and muted this time around. There does seem to be more tracks in this game, but lots of the tracks all take place in similar looking areas, and while the last game had less tracks but more locations, in this game it's more tracks and less locations, and the locations that are here kinda look bland for the most part in my opinion. Now that's not to say that I didn't enjoy the tracks, I just found myself getting bored after seeing the same location a few times in a row. Now unfortunately though, there is something that I think absolutely cripples this game, and it's the difficulty. Now the last game was challenging for sure, but remember how I said it could feel like it was impossible to beat an opponent on the odd occasion? Well, in this game it's the same, but it happens nearly every single race, and the game isn't even subtle about doing it. Early on into the career mode, I noticed 1 or 2 opponents just flying ahead of the pack. Now, I would complete these races near perfectly and stay ahead of every other racer no problem, but one opponent was nearly 10 seconds ahead of me in the distance with no realistic way to be able to catch them. Now after 4 races and this happening in 3 of them, I somehow managed to still come first in the tournament and move on to the next part of career mode. Now here is where career mode fleshes out and you can choose a sponsor, earn some cash, and use that cash to upgrade your bike in the shop. This is a pretty cool new feature, but none of the upgrades are permanent, they only last for a couple of races each. I wouldn't say I'm a big fan of this, to be honest. It's kind of like buying a power up rather than buying anything meaningful for your bike. I tried out the next race in career mode and the AI was wrecking me once again. I felt like I was definitely doing something wrong here, but it genuinely seemed like there was no way for me to win with the current setup I had, and I even bought some of the upgrades from the shop beforehand as well. So I went to check out the championship mode since it was laid out similarly to the last game, but one race into that it was the exact same thing. The AI was just miles ahead of me from the get-go. At this stage I thought I was going mad, so I checked some old online reviews of the game, and yeah, it seemed to happen to the reviewers as well. I can't imagine this was intentional, but it kinda just ruins the game for me, honestly. At least this game still has a new metal soundtrack at least, and look, now that it's 2001, it's even edgier and cringier than the last time. This time we got bands like Primer 55, Pimpadelic and Bomb 32. A lot of numbers in these bands. Once again, it's a love or hate thing, but I thought the soundtrack was fun, not as good as the last game, but still cheesy and a nice throwback to the simpler times. Unfortunately, even with the better controls and cleaner graphics, I really can't recommend this game at all. The AI just seems busted to the point where it actually ruins the game, and even though the game has more tracks, they are seriously lacking in variety compared to the last game. I would just skip out on this one and try the first game if you're looking for a decent motocross game on the PlayStation.
Well, it's a shame that the improvements in that game were overshadowed by the absolute god tier AI, although It could just be a case that I'm actually just really bad. Nah, I'm just gonna blame the AI, that's easier. So this leaves us with our last game, and probably Funcom Dublin's most well known, a kart racer starring children with massive heads.
Speed Freaks was a kart racer released in Europe in 1999 and later released early in the year 2000 in North America under the name Speed Punks. The game was published by Sony in both regions but was supposedly held back in America to avoid direct competition with Crash Team Racing, which was due to release around the same time, and that was probably a good idea to be fair. Speed Freaks is a game I have a strong memory of from my childhood. I don't know if it was because it was an Irish developed game or because Sony were publishing, but they pushed the marketing for the game big time here in Ireland. Front pages of magazines, demos, adverts in pretty much every magazine I was reading. If you were a kid in Ireland and you were big into the PlayStation, there was a good chance that you were aware of this game. Now, while I loved kart racers, I never owned this game, but I did get to rent it once over a weekend. Now, this was a very long time ago, so my memory is fuzzy, but I recall enjoying it a lot, but also thinking that it was very, very difficult. So this will be my first time playing the game again in roughly about 20 years or so let's see how Funcom Dublin's take on the kart racing genre holds up after all this time. Now the first thing you'll probably notice about this game is its character designs. All the racers have comically large heads, and this was a take on the popular Super Deformed style often used over in Japan. The particular dev team for this game within Funcom Dublin was even called SD Team, the SD standing for Super Deformed. Now the opening for this game introduces us to the roster of racers and their world. It's a very nicely animated opening to the game, and they even managed to license a Jamiroquai song for the intro. I can't let you hear it because of copyright, but the song is called Travelling Without Moving, and take my word for it, this is by far the funkiest opening to any kart racing game ever made. Once we're into the main menu, we are greeted with the usual list of modes for a kart racer. There's the tournament, single race, time trial and multiplayer modes. Multiplayer can be played with up to 4 players simultaneously, but of course the PlayStation does require a multi-tap to facilitate more than 2 players at a time. I'm just going to dive straight into the tournament mode and work my way up from there, since this makes up the bulk of the single player content in the game. Now the character select screen is pretty fun. You move through a tree house and each racer kind of has their own area that meshes with their personality. I would like it if the game shut off the racer's stats without you having to select them first, but this is only a minor complaint. Now racers in this game have 3 different stats: weight, speed and acceleration. Speed and acceleration are pretty self-explanatory, but weight changes up a few things, including your car's handling and the amount of time it takes to recover from collisions. Now you start this game off with 6 characters, but there are also 3 unlockable characters as well, which we'll introduce later as we move throughout the game. Now tournaments in this game follow the usual kart racer formula. 4 tracks played in succession, the racer with the most points at the end is crowned the winner, and there are some unlockable extras if you get first in every race in a tournament. Now difficulties unlock as you progress, so we'll just get started off here with easy. Now once we're in the game, things should start to feel very familiar. If you played any popular kart racer, everything here will feel really natural to you. You can accelerate and brake, you've got access to a paraslide for tight or precise turning, and you can drive into boxes dotted around the track to get items to help yourself and hinder your opponents. Now the items in this game are pretty good. They are mostly Mario Kart derivatives, but they all work really well and nothing here feels unbalanced. You have missiles which act like green shells, homing missiles which act like red shells, slime which acts like banana peels, etc. All pretty standard stuff. There are also some more unique weapons which add a spin to things. There is a machine gun power up which has a slight lock on that feels really good to use. There is this rainbow projectile that moves throughout the middle of the track and can only be dodged by staying to the sides. You can also get a tire pop power up which bursts the tire of every other racer on the track. You then need to tap the X button again to inflate your tires. This seems pretty overpowered, but it's usually only picked up by somebody near the back of the pack, so while it's rough, it rarely causes you to lose a race. So the overall weapon selection here is good, nothing too exciting, but everything here works well, and that's the main thing. There is an additional pickup on the tracks as well as item boxes. You'll often see these boost pickups around each track, and these unsurprisingly fill your boost meter. In this game, rather than getting boosts for performing big jumps or paraslides, you get a dedicated boost button which can be used to activate a boost at the cost of draining your boost meter. The way boost works is that the longer it is held down, the faster it gets, so there's a bigger reward for saving up your meter for a single boost rather than using it for quicker short boosts. That being said, using a small bit of boost coming out of tricky turns, taking shortcuts or just regaining your speed after crashing is a fine choice as well. Now there's also some boost arrows which give you a quick boost if you drive over them, and the game has your standard start line boost which can be activated by accelerating just before the green light. You can also collect these rare golden boost pickups which fill your boost to max instantly, so if you want to navigate the tricky driving needed to collect one of these, it will give you a huge advantage for your effort. And speaking of driving, the control in this game is really quite good for its time. It's still a kart racer after all, so it's easy to pick up and play, but the karts have a really nice weight and feel to them while driving. The power sliding here is pretty nice as well. It's not really like your standard slide where you hold the button as you turn to kind of drift. I mean, you can do that, but in this game it's probably better to use little taps while turning to quickly adjust your kart. You can use either L1 or R1 to activate the slides, and it allows you to quickly make adjustments while turning. Now this becomes pretty mandatory as the complexity and difficulty of the races increase, and pulling off a series of successful power slides and nailing a shortcut feels really good, and this is what you hope for from these kinds of games. Now as mentioned earlier, I remember stating that the game was pretty difficult when I was a kid, and I could see how this might have been the case. The AI in this game is pretty good. The max number of racers on a track at one time is 6, and the enemies are aggressive, they'll use shortcuts, they're accurate with weapons, and they're not afraid to fuck you up on the last lap either. But that being said, this is a game where if you get good at the driving mechanics, manage your weapons and boost usage at appropriate times, you'll find that this is a challenging kart racer, but a very fair one. Easy to pick up and play, but difficult and rewarding to master. The 4 tracks of the opening tournament are straightforward and easy enough to get through. Each race is 5 laps and you've got a fun seaside track, a city themed track, a track within a stadium, and a jungle themed track as well. Now each of these are well designed and visually look fantastic also. I haven't really talked about the graphics much, but I think from a pure tech standpoint, this might be the most visually impressive kart racer on the PlayStation. It's incredibly bright and colourful, and every single track looks fantastic, and it all runs really well too. The big-headed character designs may not be to everybody's liking, but I think it's hard to argue that the tracks and racing here doesn't look fantastic overall. So moving on, we finish the easy tournament with 4 victories, which wins us the cup but also unlocks us our first character challenge. When you win a tournament, you then get to race one of the 3 bonus characters. This is specifically what I remember being very difficult about this game, the character challenges. They are pretty simple. It's a 3-lap race on a track featured in the previous tournament, and it's just pure racing here. Weapons have been removed, so you need to rely on skill, boosts, and shortcuts to win. Another thing that makes this difficult is that the bonus characters in this game each have better stats than any of the normal characters, so they are statistically better than you, so it's definitely a tougher race because of that. Now all this being said, I'd like to think that I have gotten a little bit better at games over the years, and thankfully I was able to beat Coswald on my first attempt after nailing the shortcut and boost lines. Definitely the most difficult race so far, but not that bad all things considered. Now that I've unlocked the dog, who at this point is the best racer available to me, I continue on into the medium tournament. This is another strong set of tracks, and the difficulty has taken a noticeable increase as well. The dog is a lighter character, so it took me a while to get used to the change in controls, but once we got it down, we were flying along. Unfortunately, it's at this stage you notice that a lot of the tracks follow similar themes from the previous tournament. Now don't get me wrong, while the track designs are very different and unique from one another, there's only a small number of themes for each track in the game. You'll have a few city tracks, a few seaside tracks, some jungle tracks and stadium tracks, but that's pretty much it. The game only has a total of 12 tracks, which is quite small for a kart racer. Now, as mentioned, the game itself looks great, but it is lacking in the visual variety that we'd expect from something like Mario Kart or Crash Team Racing. And while I'd say all the tracks here are very good, they are also missing some of the bigger set pieces and obstacles that make certain tracks in the genre so memorable. So anyway, we managed to get through all 4 of the medium tracks in first place again, and this unlocks our second character challenge, this time against the Japanese racer Tetsuo. Now Tetsuo once again has slightly better stats than the dog, but this track has a ton of speed boosts that make it pretty easy to get ahead early on, so this challenge race is pretty easy compared to the last one. Now that we've unlocked Tetsuo, we can move on to the hard tournament. Tetsuo once again has a big weight difference compared to the previous racers, and it took me a while to get used to driving with him again. It might not have been the best choice to use him since the tracks in the hard tournament are genuinely a big step up compared to the previous 8. Lots of sharp turns, areas with multiple quick turns next to cliff hazards, and lots more water to deal with. Once again, the tracks follow the same visual themes as before, but I would say that the 4 tracks here are probably the best in the game, quite difficult but very rewarding to master. It was tough, but we managed to get first in all 4 races, which brings us to the final race of the game, the Beamer Character Challenge. Now this is where the game's difficulty curve shoots through the roof. In the past, you needed to play pretty well to come in first in most tracks. Definitely a challenge, but you could make a few mistakes and still win without too much hassle. This race against Beamer though, if you make a single mistake during the race, you might as well just restart because Beamer is no fucking joke. Beamer has the best stats in the game, so there is no way you're going to outrace him normally. You got to take advantage of every available shortcut on one of the most difficult tracks in the game, and it requires you to have mastered the power slide and boost mechanics just to make sure that you don't succumb to any hazards. And as mentioned, if you hit just one hazard, you might as well just restart the race because Beamer isn't going to give a shite. Once I swapped over to the dog and memorised the shortcuts and did the race back to back 10 times in a row, I managed to finally win the race, and let me tell you, it was very satisfying. A great challenge to finish up the game. And then after that, that's kind of it. You can try to get the best times in the time trial mode. There's a few fun bonuses you unlock like gold wheels, and even though I said earlier there was only 12 tracks, there is 12 additional mini tracks for each level, but these are very small basic tracks that in no way compare to the content you'd see in the main game. Nice to have, but they won't really hold your attention for too long. And I haven't really talked much about the music or sound in this game. The sound effects here are once again really good. Weapons and tire screeches sound great all around. The music here is more up-tempo electronic music featuring a nice mix of techno, tribal and drum and bass. Overall it's really good, there's just not a whole lot of it. Along with the tracks not having very many different visual themes, the same songs get used across multiple different races as well. So when the city tracks both look and sound the same, it's definitely more noticeable. The music that is here though is great and suits the tracks and tempo of the race as well. The challenge race music especially is fantastic. I had to listen to it a whole lot while racing Beamer, but I would be lying if I said that it didn't keep me hyped throughout. So that's Speed Freaks. Honestly, I'd be comfortable saying that this is one of the best kart racers on the PlayStation. It's lacking the content and variety of some of its contemporaries at the time, but graphically the game is fantastic. Probably the best looking kart racer on the PS1, at least from a technical standpoint, and the actual racing here is superb. It's easy to pick up but incredibly satisfying and challenging to master, and if you're a fan of the genre, you should 100% give this game a try.
Well, there you have it. That was a look at every single game released by Funcom Dublin, and to be completely honest with you, Impact Racing, Championship Motocross, Speed Freaks, enjoyed all of them quite a bit. Really good games even today. Championship Motocross 2001 on the other hand, you can skip that one. So what happened to Funcom Dublin then? Well, long story short, the internet killed them. So after the development of Championship Motocross 2001, Funcom Dublin set their sights on the next generation of hardware, specifically the Xbox, with a water racing game called Jet Sprint MX. Now at the same time, the main Funcom office in Oslo was also seeing some great success with their PC games over the past few years. Funcom had begun to specialise in online gaming. Over on their website you could play online versions of backgammon and card games, and these proved to be very popular with their website, getting thousands of hits a day. So Funcom noticed the shift towards online gaming, and in particular the upcoming MMORPG genre. So Funcom and Oslo decided to take a risk and work on their biggest, most expensive project yet, Anarchy Online, a sci-fi MMO for PC. This was all separate from the Dublin office of course, and while the team in Dublin were working on their new game for the Xbox Jet Sprint MX, Oslo were also busy putting everything they had into Anarchy Online. Unfortunately though for Funcom Dublin, undertaking a project as big as an MMO proved to be very costly, and eventually the decision was made to close Funcom Dublin and direct all available funds and resources to completing Anarchy Online. The closure of Funcom Dublin of course meant Jet Sprint MX was never finished, but there are some early images which show how big a step up this game could have been for the team over in Dublin. As for Funcom, well, their gamble with Anarchy Online paid off. It was a huge success, one of the most popular MMOs of the pre-WoW era, and one of the first true sci-fi takes on the genre. Funcom from then on out mostly stuck to online games. Some of their more popular releases included Dreamfall: The Longest Journey, Age of Conan and The Secret World, and they're still going strong today, so good for them. So that's pretty much it as far as Irish console games are concerned, but the good news is that it doesn't seem like we're actually that far away from finally getting the 6th Irish console game. One of gaming's most famous power couples, id Software founder and Doom designer John Romero and BAFTA award-winning Brenda Romero came over to Ireland to help boost the games industry here, and just happened to fall in love with Galway and happened to move here and set up a game studio. It's funny because you can go to any old gaming convention here in Ireland nowadays and it will have the Romeros and their whole family there just hanging out talking to people. John is also one of the most metal looking dudes you'll ever meet in real life. Never have I seen a pair of New Rock boots so big. Now Romero Games have released a few games so far, but their next big project is a game called Empire of Sin, which looks like a cool combination of Mafia and XCOM, which sounds amazing to be honest. And guess what? This game is due to release not just on PC, but on all current home consoles as well. So finally, the 6th Irish console game is coming. There's also a really good mini documentary from NoClip with John Romero talking about his move to Ireland, so if you want to find out more about Ireland's game industry, I'll link that in the description below. But for now, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to look back at one of Ireland's most prolific game studios with me. They made a lot of good games in my opinion, and I don't think they deserve to be forgotten. As always, I'll have more videos on the way. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like and subscribe, it's always greatly appreciated. And if you didn't like the video, just close your eyes, I guess. You can check out some of my previous videos here on the thing that's popping up in front of me. I don't know how it works, but I'm sure you can see the videos. Click on one of them. They're pretty good.